Hey guys, what's up? One of my main issues with modern day science is that ever since quantum physics has been introduced to the modern day curriculum in the 20s with Heisenberg, it's really kind of put a stopping point on physicists who refuse to study philosophy. And what I mean specifically is the fact of wave particle duality. The uncertainty principle brought up by Max Planck and Werner Heisenberg and many other people. So whenever I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but just to go really quickly, wave particle duality basically means if you as a physicist and observer are looking at a particle, it's in a fixed location. But when you're looking, if you're not looking at it, if you're not looking at the experiment and looking away, it becomes a wave. Okay, a wave of potential possibilities and potential locations. Um, so what that is basically implying is that an observer's consciousness affects the outcome of atomic particles, and it's really no one really knows how to interpret that on a physical day-to-day basis. What it basically implies is that human interaction is dependent upon people's intent and consciousness and awareness. And the irony is that science's whole mission was to take humanity and observers out of the equation, to make everything objective and get rid of subjectivity so we can know what reality and being is, right? So so when wave particle duality, comes to the fore saying, hey, the observer is actually affecting the experiments, that just basically shat on every kind of modern day Newtonian scientific theory from that point from that point backwards. Um, so what my basic inquiry is why are physicists continually pushing their objective reality and their objective stance on particles and fucking physics experiments, whereas wave particle duality proves that can't exist. That's not actually possible. There's no way to separate the observer from the observed. And there's two really fascinating books on the topic that are actually an easy read for the layman. The first one is The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra. And the second one is The Dancing Woolly Masters by Gary Zukov. And when I read those books 10 years ago, it totally expanded my mind on what physics could be. And not only physics, but what philosophy could be. Because when you step into these realms of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, I'm not into that. I'm not into the math at all. I'm not saying I'm a theoretical physicist. I'm saying I know I'm familiar with the ideas. And with the ideas so far portray and represent and imply is that the observer is no longer separate from the observed, and that is a huge mindfuck for science. Science cannot wrap its mind around the fact that you're observing something affects the outcome of it. And what it basically implies is that all of humanity is dependent upon interpretation and subjectivity, which is basically anti-scientific. But it just so happens that all the other religions of the world have already said this. And science is trying to, of course, science's main goal in life is to disprove God, disprove purpose, and disprove any kind of creation or intent in the universe. And when they get into quantum physics, that kind of fucks their theory up, because today's science is not about experiment and discovery. It's about, I have a previous foundation agenda and I'm going to try and push that with the kind of experiments I want to do. Well, that's no longer the case. And if people can't realize that science has been topsy-turvy ever since the quantum mechanics game has been pushed. Even Einstein doesn't like quantum mechanics because he said he believes God has a specific mathematical formula, whereas quantum mechanics says no, it's all relative. And I believe in God too. But I don't think there's a limit to what we can define as what God can do or not do. God can do anything, obviously, but that doesn't mean 2 plus 2 can ever equal 5. Okay? But the interesting thing about that is, of course, the law of conservation of mass. And what is that? It says Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Okay? And yet at the same time, they say the Big Bang was created out of nothing. So despite that lame argument, the Big Bang's created out of nothing, but the law of conservation of mass says you can't create something out of nothing. Let's just forget that for a second and say, oh yeah, okay. What if we bang two particles together in a quantum machine that bangs two particles together? You would expect that it would just be the two particles, they would just kind of fragment and then break into pieces of the same size and spread out. But that is not what is occurring. What is occurring in these quantum experiments is that when you bang two particles together, hundreds of different particles come out of that. So particles of the same size are created. When you bang two of them together, you get 100 different ones of the same size, which defies the law of conservation of mass. So my question to these scientists is, how is the law of conservation of mass relevant when quantum mechanics proves it's not true? And how is any objective stance on science going to have any weight if we're going to accept that the subject is a part of the experiment at this point in time? And they can't answer that, okay? Only the New Agers, only the pseudoscience representatives can actually explain this contradiction. And it's not a contradiction at all, because mind creates matter. Mind moves matter, as the philosopher Virgil says. So when we look at Nietzsche's journals, Friedrich Nietzsche, when we look at his journals, he's literally saying his thoughts were affecting the lightning. And he actually asked certain physics professors what kind of clothes or chains or jewelry he could wear so as to decrease these effects of lightning occurring during his great thoughts. And to be honest, I've experienced that too, and I'm not fucking crazy, because it's in Nietzsche's journals. Not only in Nietzsche's hidden journals, but in the Gay Science, Die Fröhliche Wissenschaft, or The Joyful Wisdom. In that book, they have the journal entries in there. Walter Kaufman, the translator, puts them in the footnotes, saying he fears lightning and stuff like that. Okay, so we need to really take science today with a grain of salt. If you're not using the scientific method, if you already have a preconceived notion of what reality is and then you do your experiment, that's not science. Science means throwing everything out the door, what you thought you knew, and just do the experiment. And what quantum mechanics has shown time and time again is that the observer affects reality. Okay, what does that mean? That means your mind, your consciousness, your soul, your ego, your id, whatever, is affecting the outcome of, microscopic particles, okay? And if our minds affect microscopic particles, who's to say Nietzsche and I have not affected the lightning? Y'all hear that? Oh, okay, it's just some car in the neighborhood. Anyway, sorry. So that's my main inquiry today. That's my main, pet peeve against modern day science, is their refusal to admit the observer effect is essential in not every experiment, but in certain subatomic particle experiments. And that's a slap in the face to Newtonian mechanics, to our modern day science, which says everything is objective, and to the fact that it doesn't take the observer into account, which is basically what every religion does. Good or bad, religion says your soul is what you need to work on, your body. The world out there is an illusion. It's all sensory perception, just like in the Matrix, and it's what you do and what you think and what you feel that actually affects reality, not just what you say or eat or create with your hands. Okay, but anyway, it's kind of a moot point. I mean, it's 2018, and this stuff has been discovered 100 years ago, and we still don't know what to do with it. What you need to do with it is realize that science is a lie. Science has an agenda. Science does get political, and science does not have a scientific outlook on itself. If you don't have a science... people want to say, quantum mechanics is pseudoscience. Well, tell that to the fucking particles. That's not our fault that was the conclusion we had to come to. It's not like we decided we wanted the observer to affect reality. It's what happened. It's what literally happened, cut and paste. So most of the time people have an agenda when it approaches science, especially when arguing against astrology or, telepathy and all these other things that do have statistical data backing them up. scientifically, because their foundations are incorrect, and their foundations are that this can't possibly be true, so let's not even study it. You can't disprove something if you're not going to actually study it. Most people who hate astrology, come to me with basically zero fucking knowledge, and I have 100 books on the topic confirming time and time again my studies, not what I want to happen, but what I've read that has happened. So hopefully we can wake up. But unfortunately, most of the prophecies say we're in the dark ages, and it's not going to happen. So hopefully a few good men can know what's going on, and the rest of the world can just be blind. Anyway, y'all take it easy.